Senator Paul, it's great to see you back on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time. I don't know if this is necessarily what we were intending to talk about when we first invited you a couple of weeks ago, but now you're in the middle of the debate and controversy over the gigantic budget bill that Donald Trump and many members of Congress are advocating. You yourself have become a vocal opponent of it, based on arguments that you and your colleagues in the libertarian movement have long been arguing that it increases the debt. Our debt is already unsustainable. And it's not the first time. This is the second time that you become a vocal opponent of President Trump's, one of his signature policies, when he became a vocal opponent of his terrorist policy as well. And President Trump, I'm sure you saw, attacked you earlier today, saying something like, you don't understand the bill, it's time for you to be removed from Congress. I'm just wondering how you think about, in your role as a senator, the various kind of obligations that you have, on the one hand, to the president who was elected based on a pretty large mandate that included a whole variety of ideas about the budget, and then the state of Kentucky and its constituents, and then your own principles and your own conscience, and how you navigate those or prioritize them in the event that they conflict.
Well, I think each person in elected office is elected with their own sort of mandate or their own sort of promises. You promise people, you tell people what you stand for. And one of the key proponents I've talked about and stood for from the very beginning is I believe in a very limited government, a federal government that's, I used to say, so small you can barely see it. I don't want it involved in our personal lives, our economic lives. I want a very, very small government. But that would be a government that runs a balanced budget. And so these are things that I've been for, from the beginning, from the beginning of my entry into public life. So it'd be hard for me to change that. With the bill that's before us, the big, beautiful bill, what I am opposed to is primarily raising the debt ceiling $5 trillion. Because the implication is if you raise it $5 trillion, that means you're going to borrow $5 trillion over the next year or two. To put this in perspective, in March of this year, the Republicans were confronted with a spending bill. They had to keep government open or not. They had to keep it open at certain levels. Interestingly, most of the Republicans in March voted to keep it open at the Biden spending levels, which is kind of ironic since during the campaign they criticized Bidenomics and Biden spending and Biden this and Biden that. But the spending levels they voted for in March were Biden spending levels. But as a consequence, in September, at the end of our fiscal year, the deficit's going to be about $2.2 trillion. So I voted against those spending levels. But now my concern is that if we're going to borrow $2 trillion this year and they want to raise the ceiling to $5 trillion, what does that mean for next year? I think it means they're going to borrow well over $2 trillion again next year, which to me doesn't sound like what we say we stand for. So I'm just not for it.
Well, and just along those lines, I mean, this is an argument that I actually have been hearing a lot, but don't quite understand. The argument has been, look, yes, you were elected to represent the people of Kentucky, but Donald Trump was represented to elect the entire country, got this mandate. You, on some level, owe him some deference. I don't recall President Trump running on a platform of massively increasing federal borrowing or the federal debt. And in fact, one of his principal policies that he wanted to do was to have Elon Musk come in, and it became Doge to kind of cut the fat of government and reduce government spending. Earlier today, Elon Musk seemed to have sided with you and essentially said that he agrees completely that this bill is, in his words, an abomination, principally because of its failure to cut the necessary spending that would get our debt lowered. Do you think that might have an impact in either requiring a kind of fundamental overhaul of this bill or even potentially stopping it?
Well, he has a fairly significant platform. What do they call it? Oh, X. What used to be Twitter is X. That's a pretty big platform. So his message definitely gets out there. And to put it in contrast, this is, I think, what is sad about it. He gave up, a portion of his life to come in, try to help the country, try to find waste and fraud and get rid of it. So they came up with about $200 billion, give or take, but about $200 billion worth of actual savings that they found. The new bill we're looking at has $300 billion worth of new spending for military and for border. And so the new bill actually spends more than all of the accumulated savings that Doge found, which has yet to be codified, but the contrast between the two. And to my mind, look, I don't believe in a wide open border, but I also don't think that if you're fiscally conservative, you should believe in unlimited money for a border. There is also the argument that 95% of the influx of people across the border has diminished just by the sheer personality of Donald Trump as much as anything, that maybe we don't need a wall or a fence for the remaining 1,000 miles. But then they ask us for $46 billion. At the current expenditures, that would pave or make a wall for 7,000 miles. And some wiseacre in my caucus said, oh yeah, we're going to make a fence with Canada next. And he was joking, but the thing is we can't just quit being fiscally conservative when we believe in, well, the government has a role in having a secure border. Doesn't mean we should throw out the baby with the bathwater and just spend anything. We still should be fiscally conservative on what we spend.
But of course, this is always the question, as I remember we spent 2 months focused almost entirely on Doge and Elon Musk cuts, and the White House claimed that he was really eliminating finally all this fat and unnecessary spending in the government, something like, as you said, $250 billion. And then in one fell swoop, President Trump announced very proudly that he wanted to have the first ever $1 trillion military budget, which would require basically the exact amount that Elon and the Doge team had just eliminated to be shifted to this kind of new brand of military industrial contractors like Palantir and the like, on top of all of the other things. The question then always becomes, you have your colleague Josh Hawley, a Republican, saying, I won't vote for any bill that cuts Medicaid because that is the medical program on which the people who voted us into office rely. Do you think that a chunk of the cuts that you've envisioned as necessary to get down this national debt can be made safely in national defense, or do you think it needs to cut into the programs that all polls show Americans like most, which are Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security?
I've felt from the very beginning that this bill was secretly hijacked, and sometimes not so secretly hijacked, by the neoconservatives who want to explode the military budget. They care about defense contractors. They get rewarded by defense contractors. They really love war in a way. They love agitation and war wherever they can find it. And they sort of fear war ever ending, because it's this constant supply of billions and trillions of dollars. But they hijacked this bill. From the very beginning, that's all they cared about was increasing the military levels. But they'd already gotten an increase in the military levels. The military levels was the one thing up here that's been exempt from any kind of restraint. And then they want to add another $150 billion on top of about a 3% increase from last year. We still spend more on our military than the next at least 10 countries combined. It is not a small amount of money, and it's an extraordinary amount of country. We have bases in 700 countries. So there's a lot we could do on restraint. Now, the good thing is that on occasion, Donald Trump really does sound like a president who believes in foreign policy restraint. When he was in Saudi Arabia, he said the era of nation building and interfering in everybody's country is over, and that sounded good. And I think many of his instincts are in that direction, but I think he has some advisors, we won't name any names, but Lindsey Graham, that really want something different than what the president wants. I think they are part of the ones who are trying to use the big, beautiful bill to get what they want, which is an exploded military budget.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.